I have a little diagram here that explains really well some of the authentication methods that we can use. We have the traditional cookie-based authentication, which we've covered slightly in the security section, and also the modern token-based authentication method. And the cookie-based authentication has been the default tried and true method for a long time. As you can see here, we have a browser and a server. We usually have a post request to authenticate or sign in, and we send the username and password over to the server. The server checks this, makes sure that the passwords match and that the user exists, and if everything goes well, they send back a response saying, HTTP, okay, you can sign in. But they also send a header that is set cookie with the session that is a cookie, which is a random piece of string. And this random piece of string is going to identify this browser. It's going to say, anytime you want another request, like API users here, send me the cookie. That is the cookie that I just sent you from the server. And in this case, if the browser wants to get the user endpoint, it talks to the server again. The server sees that there's a cookie. It's going to check this cookie to the one that it's created over here. It has to remember that cookie and make sure it matches, similar to the way we had password that needed to match. So the server is going to work here. It's going to do a bit of work. It's going to say, okay, yeah, I have this cookie. I remember it. I did assign you this cookie. I know who you are. So here is your information of the user. You get name foo back. And cookie-based authentication is what we call stateful. This means that an authentication record or session must be kept both in the browser as well as the server. The browser keeps their session cookie in the header, and the server has to keep track of the cookies that it sent out to the clients in, let's say, a database or some other way to manage that data, because whenever they get a request, they have to go through those cookies and figure out if any of them are valid and which user information they should pass based on that cookie. And it has to keep track of these active sessions in the database. And the beauty is that once the user, let's say, logs out of the app, the session is destroyed both on the client and server side. Nice and simple. Now, token-based authentication, on the other hand, is a little bit different. And it's something that has gained more and more popularity over the last couple of years with single-page applications. And when it comes to token-based authentication, the most common one that most people talk about is the JWT token. That is the JSON Web Token authentication, which we're going to cover in this course. Now, let's take a look at a token-based authentication. A user logs in or tries to log in and authenticate by sending username and password. The server checks that password, makes sure that everything works with the user. Yep, the user exists. Yep, the password is right. And they're going to send, instead of a cookie like we did here, they're going to send a token, a JWT token. And this token, which we're going to cover, has some special information, but it looks quite similar with cookies in that it's all jumbled up piece of text. And this token, instead of being in a set cookie like we had here, is actually stored on the browser in something like local storage or session storage. Again, something that we'll cover. But this browser now remembers this token. Now, anytime this browser or user needs to access information, they have to send with their request this authorization header that we give the bearer JWT and the token number. Again, we'll cover this, so don't stress too much. We just want to get the flow of how everything works here. Now, the interesting part happens here. When the JWT token is sent with the request to get the user endpoint, the server doesn't have to actually store that information anywhere. As a matter of fact, the server doesn't really care about what JWT sessions it sent, because they can simply, the way JWT tokens work is that they simply can verify that what they signed and the token that they created is correct. Without touching a database, without doing anything, they simply run a .verify method on it. And they can send whatever data back to the browser. And the interesting part is that within this JWT token, there's user information that can be stored as well. Again, this is something that we're going to come back to. So this diagram is going to make a lot more sense towards the end, but I want to introduce you to the concept. The main takeaway is that token-based authentication, in theory, is stateless. The server does not need to keep a record of which users are logged in or which JWTs have been issued. Instead, all the server needs to do is decode this JWT and make sure that it's a valid token by running this method, verify. And once a user logs out, the token is destroyed on the client side, but there's no necessarily an interaction that happens on the backend. Now, why would we pick one over the other? There's pros and cons to everything. And I want to give you a heads up. If you go online, there's a ton of debates as to what people think. And some people think that this is the best way to do it. Others think that this is the best way to do it. And there is just a massive debate. When it comes to session, it's a really hotly debated topic. And there are going to be people that really hate one way and really like the other way. So keep that in mind. And I'm actually going to give you resources throughout this section that debate both topics so you can make a decision for yourself. The way I'm going to teach this section is I'm going to show you how to do a token-based authentication, but also including sessions that are very similar to cookie-based authentication so that you can decide for yourself what is best. I'm going to show you what I think is best personally, but that doesn't mean it's the right way or that you need to do it only this way. There's many, many ways to do it. But like I said, if you go online and start reading, your head's going to hurt about all the pros and cons and options. So I'm going to go over a few of these pros and cons. Now, token-based authentication, the biggest advantage is the idea of tokens over cookies. It is stateless. The backend does not need to actually record or store the tokens in a database. Each token is self-contained and contains all the data required to check its validity, as well as convey user information. So the server's job is actually simplified. The only job is then to sign the tokens, and anytime it gets a request, to just verify the token. Nice and easy. We just made the server work a lot less, which is always nice. The other part is that unlike cookies, which are meaningless strings, in JWT, you can actually have any type of data you want inside of the JWT. So you can have things like user ID or the name of the user inside of this token so that when the server receives it, it can actually see what type of data this JWT token contains. Another good thing about tokens is that unlike cookies that work really, really well with one single domain, the classic browser server client relationship, a token-based approach makes it really, really easy for you to work with different APIs. If your company had multiple APIs, you can use the same JWT token across different APIs. Because a JWT token is required and checked with each and every call, as long as the token is valid, the requests can really be processed by anything. And yes, there are ways to do this with a cookie-based authentication as well, but it's definitely more complicated. Now, the other thing is that with token-based authentication, it can serve both browser and native mobile platforms like iOS and Android. Because having cookies on native mobile platforms is actually, well, they just don't mix well together. It is possible to work with it, but using cookies with mobile platforms is really, really hard. Tokens, on the other hand, is nice and simple, works quite well. All right, so tokens are awesome. Let's just pick tokens and forget about cookies. Well, again, as we know, as senior developers, there's always pros and cons. The cons is that the size of a JWT compared to a cookie is actually quite different. JWT, because they hold information, are a lot bigger. And because you're sending them on every request, that definitely increases the number of bytes that you have to transfer back and forth, back and forth. So depending on your situation, the size of the token can become problematic. The other part is that the fact that we're storing information in JWT about the user, it can be dangerous if we store anything sensitive about the user. If the JWT token is stolen, bad people can actually decode it and see what's inside the JWT token quite easily. And there's a few other things, and I'm going to leave resources for you. Like I said, this is a topic that just goes deeper and deeper and deeper, and there's a lot of points to consider. So to simplify things, I'm going to make it easy for you. I'm going to show you how I implement authentication, and you can grab whatever pieces you want for your own application. At the end of the day, though, we're going to make sure that our application is going to be secure and manages sessions in a way that won't make our app susceptible to bad people attacking us. All right, let's take a break, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.